everyone, and welcome. Today I'm going to do a non-spoiler review for the Red Rising trilogy by Pierce Brown. This is an adult sci-fi trilogy that consists of Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star. So yes, sci-fi, something that I normally don't read, but I do think that this is the ideal series to pick up if you want to dip your toes into sci-fi and you've read some fantasy before, because this almost felt like fantasy wearing a sci-fi coat. I think that there aren't any very difficult theories that you need to understand. The sci-fi is basically at the surface because of the setting, because of course this story takes place in Mars and space. And if there are any scientific things, you just need to know how it's called and how it works. You don't get an entire explanation of the how and why, so that's why I do think that it's a very accessible trilogy if you're new to the sci-fi genre. Now, if you've seen some of my wrap-ups or vlogs, then you do know that I disliked Red Rising, and that I actually wanted to DNF the series if it wasn't for my Expanding My Horizon series that I'm doing on this channel. However, I decided to pick up the second one, and that's basically the best decision that I've made, because the second one is one of my all-time favorite books. The third one was also a great conclusion to the trilogy, so I do feel like if you only watch a review for Red Rising, you might have a different idea of what the series is actually about, and it's very important that you see a review of the entire trilogy and that you don't make up your mind on the first couple of pages of Red Rising. So, without further ado, let's get into the review. And as always, I quickly go over the premise and then what I thought of different storylines. So in these books you follow Darrow. Darrow is a red and he's working in the mines of Mars. In this dystopian society, reds are basically the lowest class, and they have been told for years that they are working on Mars, sacrificing their lives because they are making Mars ready for human life, since Earth is dying and otherwise humanity would be lost. However, Darrow finds out pretty quickly in the first book that this is all a lie, and that people have been living on the surface of Mars for hundreds of years. That they are basically not telling this to the Reds so that they can use their easy forces and practically use them as slaves. Darrow decides to infiltrate in the Golds, which is basically the highest class of society, and break the system from within. So as I already said, I actually didn't like Red Rising that much, and a lot of it had to do with the plot. It's basically the same as The Hunger Games. If you've seen the first movie of The Hunger Games, it's the same, with a trial, with a contest, with a lot of people dying basically, and it felt just very similar. I also didn't really have the idea that it was sci-fi, because even though this took place on Mars, it didn't really open up to the rest of space yet, and the continent that they were on was very similar to Earth, with grass, mountains, water, so it all felt very similar. I do think that the story ramped up towards the end, so if you like the last quarter of Red Rising, I do think that you would like Golden Sun and Morning Star even more, because that's the same of that, but bigger and stronger. Then the second and the third one do open up, and there you get a space opera, where you go to the different planets in the solar system, and you also have a lot of space battles. So where the first one felt almost YA-ish, this isn't true in the second and the third. It had a much more gritty nature with more plot twists. In the first one you already have some plot twists, but in the second and the third one this ramps up even more, up to the point that you never really know what's going to happen, and I actually quite enjoyed that. So in general, I think that the storylines are quite weak in the first one, but you shouldn't base your opinion of the entire trilogy on that, and you should definitely read at least the entire book of the first of Red Rising. If you dislike the ending of Red Rising, then I don't think that you will like the entire trilogy, but if you thought that there was something there, then I do suggest you pick up Golden Sun to see if it's something for you. So if we then go over to writing style and some of the technical choices that Pierce Brown made, it is interesting to know that this story is written in first person present tense, with one POV, of course. We follow Darrow. And I must say that I didn't really think that this is the best execution of first person, especially in the first book I had a lot of problems. Basically, when you use first person, you really need to know who your character is, how he thinks about things, what are his personality traits, and what is his worldview at that time that you introduce him. And I think that in the first book there are a couple of things that are being said that just don't really align with the person that Darrow is, or that he's been introduced to up until that point, and that really threw me out of the story. For example, there is a certain paragraph where he is just out of the mines, and he explains how he has muscle ache. And he says it's like after a long workout. Now, as a slave who never had workouts for joy or for fun, I don't think that that's something that he would say. That's not a comparison that he would use. He would probably say after a long work day. So that immediately drew me out of the story. Some comments that he makes regarding his wife were also things that I found a little bit icky, and I don't have a problem with icky, but it just didn't fit with who Darrow was. And that was throughout the first book a complaint that I had. However, this does improve in the second and the third book, so I was quite happy with that. And if that is one of your complaints for the first one, do know that that improves greatly, and I didn't have any issues in that regard for the second or the third book. However, there is one instance in the trilogy, and I won't say in which book, so that you don't really know, because there are a lot of plot twists, but there is one plot twist that is solely a plot twist because Pierce Brown cheats the rules of first person. If you're reading first person and you're in the mind of that character, you know everything that that character is doing. And that character can't really fool you, but that's what Pierce Brown made Darrow do in one of these books. And I must say that I didn't really have that big of a problem with it. In the greater image of it, the entire trilogy is good, and that you have one of those instances isn't going to decrease my overall enjoyment. But especially when you have so many plot twists in the entire trilogy, I don't think that that's necessary. And I also think that that's just something that you shouldn't do. So yes, in terms of first person, if this is something that you are a big fan of, I don't think that this is the best execution. In terms of writing style in general, I do think that this is a very clear voice of Pierce Brown. I think if I would pick up another book by him, not knowing that he's the author, I could immediately say, yes, this is written by this author. And that's something that I always quite enjoy, when an author isn't just one out of a dozen. And I do think that this is an amazing trilogy to pick up if you're looking for a fast-paced read that just makes you feel awesome and cool. You all know those kinds of series and TV shows, and that's really how this made me feel. In general, maybe the first book, as I said, it's not as good, but the second and the third one you're going to want to read in one go, just because it's so fast-paced, because you have so many plot twists and turns. And in that regard, I do think that even though it's a far stretch, if you like that aspect of Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, that this is something that you will like here as well, where you just don't know where the story is going to go because it surprises you that much. I also think that Pierce Brown has some amazing one-liners and speeches that just make you feel cool in general, and just have an awesome presence of these characters. Now, I must say that sometimes there are some cringy lines as well, and that's an inconsistency that I can't really believe, that the author who writes such amazing speeches can also write some cringy lines that just shouldn't be here. But I must say this is only a couple of times in the entire trilogy, and in general I did enjoy the writing style and some of the speeches that Pierce Brown has written. And to give you some quotes, for example, "I will die, you will die, we will all die, and the universe will carry on without care. All that we have is a shout into the wind, how we live, how we go, and how we stand before we fall. Friendships last minutes to make, moments to break, years to repair. Wise men read books about history. Strong men write them." So those are just one-liners that really hit you quite hard, and that's really throughout the entire trilogy. I don't think in the first one, or maybe I was just disliking it that much that I really didn't pay attention to it, but in the second and the third one that definitely comes back almost at every page. I also quickly want to mention that I recently read Malice by John Gwynne, and then the first Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, and what is often said about these authors is that they can write action scenes very well, and I think that this is also the case with Pierce Brown, because even though this is space opera and you have a lot to keep track of with these different spaceships and where are they and what are they doing at the moment, I think that Pierce Brown has written that tremendously well. I usually am the person who skips through action scenes because I don't really care and I can't really vision them into my head, but this time I could. And so if you like Malice, or if you like The First Blade by Joe Abercrombie, then I do think that this, or at least the action scenes, are something that's going to be to your liking as well. If we then go over to world building, as I said, I think that in the first book that is a little bit lacking because you stay on Mars. And in the beginning you do see the mines, you visit the mines, but this is quite short, and I also think that you don't really have an envisionment of how they look, and that takes you a while, maybe to the second or the third book even, before you have an actual idea. So I do think that that's maybe Pierce Brown's fault, or a little bit lacking in that department. And then after that, when you have the school-like setting with the arena, like the Hunger Games, it's very reminiscent of Earth with grass, mountains, water. So I never really felt like I was on Mars. And that was a little bit of a pity. and I think that that could have been done better for the first book just to hook the reader in. However, this does change in the second and the third book. As I said, you visit different planets and some of their ecosystems are very different than what we are used to here. For example, there is one that is a little bit reminiscent of Antarctica, for example, and I thought that that was quite cool. You also see the different colors in this dystopian society and how they live, and that was also very interesting to see. Now, if you are wondering about the sci-fi elements, because normally I talk about the fantastical elements, which aren't here of course, but the sci-fi elements are very easy to understand. A lot of them are actually a more advanced technology of what we already have, such as spacesuits. Everybody knows how that works. They have a little bit of a more advanced technology in that department. You have 2 or 3 sentences of explanation and you're good to go. No very difficult theories or anything like that. Now, their society is actually based on the Roman Empire, and that's a very nice tie-in, and I think if you like history, for example, that's very nice to read about. And that's something that you will definitely see in the second and the third book, because there we see some more high-end Gauls who of course know this history and they really live by it. For them, the Spartan society, for example, is something that they want to strive towards. They are very hard people. So that part of the world building I actually liked a lot, because of course, in these books, these people are descendants from Earth, and they actually have part of that history as well. So what Pierce Brown did with that, I do think was quite enjoyable to read. When we then go over to the characters, I do think that this is another very strong point of this trilogy. And yes, you have Darrow, and I think that a lot of people like Darrow, he's fine. But if you would ask everybody who's read this trilogy who their favorite character is, I don't think that a lot of people would actually say Darrow. Because he's fine, he's okay, he has a very interesting story arc, because of course he starts as a Red, somebody who despises the Gauls once he figures out the secret, but then when he goes and lives among these Gauls, you have a lot of conflicting feelings, and you really get to live through them, through Darrow, which I really enjoyed. But where the story shines, in my opinion, is how Darrow interacts with Gauls, with also Reds, whom he can say that he is actually also a Red. And I thought that those interactions in this dystopian society were very interesting to follow. Also, because you are among a lot of these Gauls, you actually have a lot of antagonists. And I like that, because in most fantasy stories you have one main antagonist and that's basically it, but here you had a lot. And because you live among them through Darrow, you actually understand a lot of their actions, and you start to understand that all these people are basically just born as a Gaul, just as Darrow has been born as a Red. And a lot of them aren't that bad and are very interesting to follow, and their story arcs and how they change throughout the entire trilogy was also very nice to follow. And I also think that the villains in general, because you do have a few, you have a few true villains, are very interesting to see what the dynamic is and how they view Darrow. So yeah, the characters, and especially the secondary characters, were very well developed, and that's something that I always like, when you don't just follow your main character and he is very well developed, but then everybody that he's talking to feels like they are cardboards just there to bring the story along. I didn't really have the feeling here, and I think that that is definitely a strong point, even though I think if you're a character-driven reader, that this might not per se be your cup of tea. I think that it's more a plot-driven story than anything else, but the characters are superb as well. So, to conclude, I think that this is an amazing and gritty trilogy that is perfect for people who want to try sci-fi and who are into very fast-paced books with a lot of action and a lot of twists and turns where you really can't predict where the story is going to go. However, if you are looking for a very good installment in first person, then I don't think that you will find this here, and you might have some issues with it. In the same vein, if you're looking for just a happy read in general, you're not going to find this here. But I would suggest that everybody reads this trilogy because I loved it that much, and I'm not the type of person who would normally gravitate towards it. I also think that if you read the first book and you're halfway and you want to stop, that you should at least try to read until the end of the first book and see if you liked that ending, because like I said, the second and the third book are nothing like the first one. So, that was everything that I wanted to say about the Red Rising trilogy. Please let me know if you've read it before and if you think a little bit the same as me, or maybe you have some other things that you want to discuss. Let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't read this trilogy yet, then please let me know if you want to pick it up now or if it isn't for you. As always, I hope that you enjoyed this video and see you next time. Bye!